This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, well, let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Freddie, welcome back again. Now
Didn't we just do this?
we just did this. We had pizza last time.
Yeah, we did. I'm looking at this empty table.
You got water though.
Well, that's true. Maybe I'll have some water.
Yeah.
And a fancy mug.
Yeah, in the fans, I got
that.
real special
Merch.
merch that's coming. Yeah. But you're now running for mayor of
It's
Nashville.
been what? It's been about a year since we talked, right?
Yeah, it's been about a year. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the funny timing. A year ago today is when I announced I was running for mayor.
Wow. You know what's crazy? You hinted
I
at it.
I was thinking real hard about it.
You hinted at it when we talked, and then you was like, "Just stay tuned." And it was probably like the next day or two.
So I waited. You know what I waited on? I waited on what were we going to hear in the state of Metro last year.
Okay.
And that was what, after that came out, like I had already had the family conversation.
Okay.
And then I was like, okay, it's time to go because we are still not hearing about the building the Nashville of this moment. We are not hearing about transit.
Yeah.
We are not hearing about, like we're hearing sort of about neighborhood infrastructure, but we are not hearing about how we recover from that moment where we literally couldn't pick up people's trash. We are not hearing about how we're going to address potholes.
Right.
So we're not hearing about the big picture stuff, and we're also not hearing about some of these details we keep missing. And so I jumped right in.
Yeah, and I have to say this for the record, so people that's watching and listening, if you look at all the mayoral candidates, Nashvillians, and I would just say take a year back and just look and see if you're community centered and community involved. I would challenge you to see or ask these mayoral candidates what they were doing a year from now that was community centered. And the reason I say that is because I know you're running for mayor, but the things I know personally that you are doing now that's community centered, you would be doing if you wasn't running for mayor.
Who has been present? Who has
So,
shown up to the fights that people needed someone standing by their side? I think these are questions that voters ought to be asking.
Yeah, and I think I just have to say that because it's authentic and it's just facts. But I think as we're deciding, who's going to be the next leader of our city, that should play a part into it. In as we're checking those boxes, for as we're voting.
So as we have been traveling the county for the past year and going way beyond the boundaries of District 19, I mean, it's a 500 square mile city, but I'll say one of the most reassuring things to me has been I'll see people, and it'll be like the 9th, 10th time, and they'll say something to the effect of, one thing I really appreciate about you is you always show up. And I think that's a big deal. And I have tried to do that in every part of the council district I've represented for the past 8 years, but I've tried to do that for people just generally speaking, right? I met a guy 2 days ago who came out to a mayoral forum, saw him again last night, and it was really interesting because he comes over and he's talking, and I didn't know him well, but he said, one thing that sets you apart is you're very approachable. Because I don't I don't get up there and just put on a politician suit to deliver some remarks, right? I try to just be a person, and in some ways one of the best compliments I got is from a woman who lives out in Whites Creek who said, one of my favorite things about the idea of you being mayor is you're just a guy. And I think it's really good to have lived experience in foreign policy, because when we got into our neighborhood in Salem Town 16 years ago, I had all the lived experience in the world to know how to first start being a neighborhood leader, which I didn't go run and say, hey, it's time for me to do this. It's neighbors inviting you into doing that. And then once I was in the process of neighborhood leadership, I had other neighborhood leaders come approach me and say, you ought to run for council. And it's that kind of process that when you are present and when you, I think, are approachable and you also are willing to work hard, it gets somewhere.
How does that shift for you mentally because your accessibility, your openness will be a little different if elected mayor, right? Have you thought about that transition and your availability to community at that point versus now.
So
And the reason I say that is because we get used to people being so accessible in a particular way, and sometimes many of us may not have like a realistic kind of idea of like how our relationship with certain individuals may change a little bit, and it's not due to the fact that you may not want to be as community centered or as approachable. It's like, no, the role is a little different. So it'd be good for you to unpack that a little bit, especially since you've been out here in these community streets for so long.
Yeah.
And I think that question applies to you and maybe a few others that's running, but not everybody for sure.
So it's really interesting because, we talked a little bit about growing up in Nashville last time, right? And so it's really interesting because growing up in the city, I used to have, a lot of the entire footprint of Nashville. I mean, we would go all over the city, and I'd set foot in just about every part of the city in the 20 years before I was really an adult here on my own. And then for the past 8 years, it's been interesting because my focus has been on the area that I represent on Metro Council. Well, even as we have grown and gotten past, going way past 20,000 people in my district, representing almost 30,000 people, it's the fastest growing part of the city in so many ways. And I think you knew my old field director, Joe Sheeran, maybe a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Joe and I bumped into each other in 2015 when I was about to run for Metro Council. And it was interesting because we had a team, right? So we had a campaign manager, we had a field director. By 2019, we had campaign manager, deputy, and then again, a field director. So we've had these teams, and I've had staff, and then in my private sector life, same thing, like always organizing around very effective teams. But I think the biggest change has been just the need for capacity, and so having other people, and I think I've always driven some of the teams I've worked with in the space of politics a little crazy because I think my personal voice is like I haven't sent many press releases in 8 years, right? Yeah. I've just tried to be, if there is an issue of the day that somebody wants to talk about, I think the same thing that this guy out in Bellevue who I bumped into again last night talked about being approachable. I think media have always found that to be the case too. They know I'm not going to shrug off a tough question. They know I'm going to be willing to speak in a very plain way about an issue. And I want to make sure I don't lose that. I don't want to have the ability to answer those questions, get buried behind a wall of, here, you have to talk to a spokesperson, right? Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting thing, is that we have historically lost access to people the further they get from us. And I think being a district council member is actually a great way. I mean, I've had this newsletter, right, that I've done for 8 years from the very first council meeting. And people really appreciate it. I mean, I've had people say, the only way I know what's going on in the city is your newsletter. I want to make sure we still have the opportunity to communicate. Right. When I'm mayor, I want to be in a position where it's not just like, hey, we send out some release. And I've actually had this complaint. A friend of mine who worked in the mayor's office and is a constituent, I used to push him a little bit. It's like, hey, I'm on the Metro Council. Y'all are sending out information and you're sending it as media releases. Why aren't you sending these as public information releases where the council is included in, like, it feels like you're putting the media first, right? As opposed to putting people first. And I think that's a thing that is, it might seem to somebody in media relations like it's a big shift, but it's a fairly subtle thing. But I feel like I want to make sure that the mayor is able to constantly be communicating just as a person with the general public of Nashville. But that's a shift, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a big shift. And so now I know you all been on these, these forums and stuff. So 100 of you all that's running, and you all have a minute or two to unpack your whole
Yeah.
vision for Nashville, right? Which that's why I haven't attended any of them, because I don't know if it's hard to do, right? But now, like, I really want to give you this opportunity to really unpack a lot of your big vision things for Nashville, for those
Yeah.
who can't make the forums, or just really not is going to get the sound bites, right, of these
Right.
things, right?
Right.
And so I like to start in a place that you've always been a component of, which is transit,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Dedicated funding.
Yep.
Can you unpack what mass transit looks like and what the next mayor has potential to do
Yep.
around that, and
Yep.
what you would do?
Yeah, so the next mayor, by the end, so this is what's crazy. We went to the State of Metro yesterday, and that was actually my first question to a mayor's office staffer that I saw there. I was like, all right, I'm hearing you list a lot of investments as headlines here. Are we doing transit? And it was sort of like, well, we might do some planning for Murfreesboro Road. And it's like, well, that's good.
Right.
Are we going to improve transit service? Because where we went to State of Metro yesterday out at the new Lawson High School in Bellevue, it would take you an hour and a half to get from where we're sitting in downtown, right
Yeah.
by the transit, like we go central. It would take you an hour and a half to get to that school, and the final 40 minutes of that is a walk up a hill on a crazy highway. I mean, it's, so we are still thinking about those scenarios. We still can barely get you to and from the soccer stadium on a game day. At the end of my term, what you should see is an emerging network of community transit centers in the communities that use transit. We already have land for one in downtown on the south side of Broadway, so not every bus in the system has to cross Broadway and add to that log jam. We should be able to get one done at Southeast, where we now have a lot of public land. We know pretty sure what's going to happen on the East Bank at this point. We should be able to put one over there. So now you've got one at Hillsborough and Green Hills. We're broken ground on one that'll get complete, I hope, by next year in North Nashville. So now if you've got North, Southeast, kind of South, East Bank, downtown has a couple nodes. Well, now you've got a half a dozen community transit centers. We've got a 3-year plan that leveraging those community transit centers think about it this way. We went from being a $2 billion to a $3 billion city in terms of our operating capacity over the past 8 years. That's a big deal. But you know where we didn't put most of that investment? We didn't grow our transit budget by that 50%. And we have the capacity to do it. When I'm mayor, we'll do this 3-year plan. We already know the spending parameters because we go put it on all of our desks 6 years ago. And we haven't even hit the year 1 of that.
Wow.
We're going to hit all 3 of those years when I'm mayor, and that's what you'll see. You'll see a frequent transit network that is mostly driven by a better bus system that links community transit centers, so not everybody has to come into downtown. And we will also do the planning for bigger picture things like Murfreesboro Road. We'll start using technology to let the transit flow better so it's not contributing to the traffic problem. And I think when we do that, people will realize, oh yeah, Nashville, like every other top 25 American city, no matter where they are in the United States, in the South, in the Northeast, in the Northwest, in the mountains, out on the coast, every other top 25 American city has demonstrated that transit works. It lowers cost of living, which is one of the biggest concerns that anybody hears about walking around the city of Nashville.
Affordability.
Affordability.
Go hand in
Transit
hand.
is a big piece of that.
Yep.
I want more people to have the opportunity I had. And when we see that these investments work because they are useful, they are cost effective, they are popular, they will serve the biggest transit generators in the region like Vanderbilt. I'll tell you one of the most important things I did here at the end of the American Rescue Plan Act funding was we're out of committee and I'm hoping my colleagues on council will support it. I got funding to jumpstart We Go Ride at all 4 historically black colleges and universities.
Wow.
This is a transit equity piece. Because what this means is faculty, staff, and students at all of our HBCUs will enjoy what all of our other colleges already enjoy. Vanderbilt, Belmont, Lipscomb, Trevecca, they are all participating in We Go Ride. And what that means is your college ID becomes a transit fare. You don't have to worry about it. You just hop on the bus, tap your card, use the app on your phone, and you're good to go, and the institutions cover it. Well, this is exactly what you're supposed to do with this type of money. This is what we should have been doing the past 3 years since COVID with federal money, is building programs like this.
Right.
When I'm mayor, we will use the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to invest in transit. We will get the Murfreesboro Road corridor totally transformed. I just came today from a ribbon cutting out on 12th Avenue South, which we just turned into a complete street with much better access for transit. Steve Bland, the CEO of the Transit Authority, said this improves reliability because we've got much better bus stops.
Yeah.
They've been creating those. It's, as a former regular transit user, dignity of ridership is a big deal.
Right.
Equitable access to the streets. I mean, Steve even spoke as a transit guy about the importance of safe infrastructure on the ground, because 95% of their riders, the way they get to the transit stop is they walk, they're in a wheelchair, they're on a bike or a scooter. They're not in their car to get to transit more often than not. So they need sidewalks, they need bikeways, they need infrastructure that is not deadly, they need crosswalks sometimes at mid-block. And all of that goes together. So you'll see, at the end of my term, you'll see a more robust transit system that you can use to get to multiple different parts of the city. You will see safe infrastructure that supports it. Last year was the deadliest year on record for pedestrians in Nashville, which is a preventable tragedy. To me, one of the most important jobs the mayor does is save lives using policy. And so that means making our infrastructure itself not actively deadly, which unfortunately for too many Nashvillians it is right now.
Well, let's go into that public safety piece of it, which transit plays a part into that. But also, when we think about public safety, a lot of times people's mind goes straight to policing.
Right.
They don't go to firefighters or social services. It goes straight to policing. And policing has always been a big buzzword, trigger, and polarizing. Some people want more, some people want less. But with a lot of these mass shootings that are happening, especially that affected our youth, whether it's right here at home in Nashville, or in Texas, or in New York, at a grocery store, or wherever it may be, here we got new policy. People are wanting some restrictions. People are wanting more SROs in schools, which is also a slippery slope for certain communities. What are your thoughts on policing today? And as mayor, who can appoint, who do appoint the chief of police here in MNPD, what are your thoughts on the current job? And what are your thoughts on what you may or may not change, or what do we need to see changing in our policing here in Nashville?
So a lot of what I think we need to do going forward is, I've been very fortunate to partner directly on a program that is working. So you just hit on it. Safety is not just policing, right? It is a lot of things, and the way that people feel safe and are safe in their communities has a lot to do with not having too much violent crime, but it also has to do with a lot of other things. So I'll talk to you about something that we've done that works, and then something that I want to see us do going forward, where I think we have started to see a little bit of pilot activity, and now it's time to really press on some of these things that are beyond policing, right? So when I got elected in 2015, District 19 is sort of the urban core of Nashville, right? And it includes the Napier and Sudicum communities. And it was very hard to take office, and I had been out there. In fact, a couple people, Odessa Kelly, who was running the community center out there, Whitney Slovic, who was just starting up a Community Achieves program in Napier Elementary, both kind of invited me into that community and said, look, you just got elected. You've got to be in a position where you can represent. And I never stopped going back. I mean, for 8 years, I've been as present in Napier as I possibly could be. And one of the reasons was, not long after I met both Odessa and Whitney, we started to realize, because I get police reports, and you'd see almost a homicide a week for those first couple of years that I was in office. So we took the first step, which was to actually build a formal relationship between the Housing Authority, MDHA, and the police department, right, MNPD. And when we did that, the nature of it was actually to bring officers out of the car and into the community, and so they would know people and be recognized, and people would recognize them. And it was not about, just flashing blue lights. It was about, we're going to have relationships, and we're going to make sure people sort of understand that it's actually not good for this community to have this much violent crime. And that was important. We started to see homicides fall off pretty sharply. But the violent crime itself wasn't always ending, and it was impacting young people in a big way. And so one of the other really important things we did, Mayor Berry and Lonell Matthews, who worked with her on this, did this big youth violence summit, because we were starting to see back 2015, 2016, violence was impacting our young people.
Right.
And so that youth violence work was really good.
Right.
And it was really good because it let young people, a lot of them in high school in Nashville, speak to the things they were concerned about.
Right.
And again, this goes way beyond just policing. This was things like college access, after school activities, right? Mental health provision, right? All of those things. So that work needs to come back off the shelf and get put into the community with a mayor ready to refocus on that. It's really important work. And then two other things. So the next step we took in Napier, where we invested a lot in the success of students at Napier Elementary, to the point where a school that had been a priority school for several years, not the list you want to be on, it's one of the worst performing schools in the state's eyes, we got them on such a good growth trajectory that they became a reward school. Well, having students succeeding is a really good thing for a community like Napier.
Right.
Well, the next step after that arrangement with the police department and the housing authority was John Button and Ron Johnson, who I had worked with when he was still over at the Oasis Center on issues impacting youth. They were in the mayor's office, and they worked on this program where you would have community safety partnership funding.
Right.
And we focused on Napier. And this is one of, I think, the most successful partnerships we built with the mayor's office, because it took that next step beyond just, hey, here's police and we're going to try a little bit of a different model here. We had Walk Bike Nashville come into the community, and it turns out that doing traffic calming, one of the big streets where people would come in fast, zoom in a car, pull a trigger, gun violence has occurred, and they'd zoom back out. Well, now that big wide street that people used to drive fast on has traffic cushions on it. It has crosswalks, letting people connect from the community straight over to the library, and even they do a walking school bus now over to Napier Elementary. We have nonprofit organizations like Recycle to Reinvest on the ground getting some of this funding. Project Return just moved over there. We got long-term affordable housing for people coming out of incarceration. And now we fixed dozens of streetlights. We added those traffic calming measures. We made the community safer on the ground, and it turns out lighting, keeping people from driving too fast to have access to commit crimes that they can get in and out of quickly. Now add all that stuff into this arrangement you've got with the housing authority, and you've moved way beyond policing. And last time I went to a community safety meeting out there, which they've been doing for more than a decade, it wasn't about the crime in the community anymore. It was about opportunities for the future. And that's the corner we can turn, because the next step we should take to keep focusing on violent crime, which you get to reduce both gun violence and violent crime, is this process of group violence intervention. And that is sort of built on the model that we're already pursuing in Napier. If you get your police, if you get your social service providers, and if you get your leaders in the communities where violent crime is occurring together, the truth of the matter is you usually know who the specific people are that are most likely to get involved in violent crime. And if you can focus on
interrupting that,
then you have less violent crime. You have less gun violence. You have fewer stray bullets catching kids that are just trying to play in their yard, or catching seniors who are just trying to sit on their front porch. And I think we can do that here in Nashville.
I want to switch over to actually.
Oh, let me say one more thing on this.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
One of the worst things that the state of Tennessee just did in this whole package of anti-Nashville bills was they just dismantled a thing that the people of Nashville said vocally that we should have, which is civilian oversight. The next mayor is going to have to figure out what the impact of dismantling community oversight means, because there still has to be some mechanism for accountability, because the other piece of this is it is not good for a community to have a lot of officer-involved shootings. When police are shooting people, that is a form of violence that has impact on the community too.
And I want to hit on that piece because let's speak on to the equitability or equity in policing, right? Which we know hasn't existed in this country. This is not in Nashville, but then throughout this country, and we talking about specifically black folks, brown folks, and poor folks. How do we get through that point? Or how do we address that? Or even having a mayor that vocalizes that it exists, right? Here in Nashville, because there are a lot of black and brown voters, right, that have a different experience with police, have a different experience with public safety.
Yep.
And a lot of them feel unheard, feel like, hey, now we have license plate readers and that
Yep.
pilot program, we have all these things.
Yep.
And when it comes to these things historically, we always know that we detriment from them the most. As our next potential mayor, how do you be transparent about those things? How do you communicate some of that things? And again, just address equity around policing and just make sure, hey, we all want to be safe in the same way, but let's not over police one group of people, one group of community members more than another. And also on the equity piece, let's give community members what they need. If a particular community is suffering more from mental health illnesses than another, like let's have that in mind when we're patrolling these communities or going out to these calls, so they're not mental health police involved shootings and things like that.
So you're getting at a lot of other things. I mean, in this
Unpack it. This
Right.
is not a forum.
No,
we
so
can go as long as we want.
That's the thing. Is diving. I mean, this is. I'm missing the pizza, but it's still a deep conversation, right?
Yeah.
So you hit on some things that are really important. So one thing that the mayor actually mentioned in State of Metro yesterday that I'm really encouraged by is not just expanding this co-response model where if somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis, the tradition in Nashville, like so many other cities, was you call the police.
Right.
If you see somebody about to jump off a bridge, if you see somebody about to walk out into traffic, if you see somebody maybe screaming at people and either reaching for a weapon or having a knife or whatever, you call the police. Well, now in Nashville, we are doing what some other cities have done. We started with co-response, where if somebody's in crisis, now if you do call the police, they will have a trained mental health professional with them to try to de-escalate that situation so that it does not involve violence. But we are about to pilot, and I think it may have technically already started, this program called REACH, which is going to be purely what you want. Like I want our police focused on violent crime. Right. I don't. And so one thing that has happened is because of this report that we did a few years ago, Driving While Black in Nashville, initiated by Gideon's Army and backed up by the Policing Policy Institute. I mean, we had 2 data sets that showed our traffic stop program
The same thing.
was actively discriminatory. Right. It was undisputed in the data, and it was first out of some data analysis done for Gideon's Army out of Vanderbilt, but then again backed up by a national organization that highlighted the same things. That's a problem. Well, the good news for Nashvillians, particularly those that were getting pulled over because of who they were, not because of what they were doing, is that has fallen off sharply. The traffic stop program is now focused on people actively involved in crimes, not just, hey, maybe you were going 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, but you also have, darker skin, and so we're going to pull you over. That's an improvement. I think the REACH process, I'm excited about that pilot where it's really interesting because I think so often we don't actually want to call the police. We want to call a person to respond to something at any time of day. If it's noise from bachelorettes being too loud next door, if it's a party bus on your block, those are not the kinds of things you want rules enforced, but you don't necessarily need an officer showing up with a gun to everything. And in fact, Chief Drake did something important where we have moved past, if you're in a wreck, you can actually kind of resolve the situation now yourself without waiting for an hour for an officer to arrive. I think those programs are all important, and I think as mayor, you want to keep a lens on this that does respond effectively to report. When you've got information that says there is some form of discriminatory activity coming, you have to be in a position to alter that. I will say one of the other things to this point about equity that's really important, that's about to get refreshed, the Metro Human Relations Commission did this really important work several years ago called Inclusivics. And it looked at the whole of Metro and then expanded it to even look at Metro schools too. And what you discover is in many departments, the people serving the city do not look like the people who are in the city.
Right.
And that's also got to be an act of intentionality, right?
It goes into that systemic change, right?
And so I am eager to see what the next version of that Inclusivics report reveals, because we want to make sure that we have appropriate relationships. And this is why I think when we talk about civilian oversight and community oversight,
Right.
we have to get past this idea that this is specifically there to attack the actions of the police department.
Right.
That's not what it is, and that's not what it's supposed to be. What it's supposed to be is strengthening relationships between the police and the community.
Right.
Because when you have that, we've seen this all around the country too. When you are doing authentic community policing, you manage to have an impact on bringing crime down in ways that aren't as harmful in a way where somebody who may not be involved in a crime or, you know, might be carrying a weapon legally but then gets shot. I mean, we have continued to see around the country some troubling incidents. I mean, we just had this terrible thing down in Memphis, right?
Yeah.
And that's not good for the community either.
Right.
And if you have better relationships between the community and police, and we know that we want them focused on preventing crime, because that's also not, like, you don't want, I don't want Nashville ever to be in a situation where people are worried about walking down the street and possibly becoming a homicide victim, right? And we have seen an uptick in crime from the very historic lows we've seen. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at trends across decades of our growing up here, Nashville is a much, much safer city than it was when we were growing up across the board. And that's what we ought to have as a big goal, is we want to keep a very, very low number of homicides. We want to keep a very low number of violent robberies or, you know, anything that involves someone hurting somebody else, like those types of violent crimes. We want to keep a lid on that, and we want to do it while also not existing in a scenario where if you live in one of Nashville's black and brown communities, you feel like you are getting treated differently. And I think all of that is possible.
I want to get your definition on equity, because I've been thinking about it like myself and like what that really means, and I came to the conclusion that equity cost. You know, equity, that's the definition I've come up with. When I think about historically what we've done to address so-called equity, and a lot of times it hasn't cost anything. It hasn't cost those that have caused the harm anything as well historically. And so I'm curious on what your definition of the word equity means to you. It don't have to be no Webster or no Oxford definition, but like Freddie's definition of what equity means and what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally for me, equity is a question of access and treatment, right? And so if we are being equitable, people have access to all of the opportunities and resources, and the way that they are treated does not have anything to do with who they are, right? We are treating people based on the scenario. Like if you are coming into an office to access services, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, what your sex or gender is, it doesn't matter what your orientation is, it doesn't matter what your race or ethnicity is, you're going to have access to those resources, you're going to be treated respectfully, you're going to be offered dignity, all of those things. And, you know, more often than not, to your point about cost, it's actually just about the process of intentionality. One thing that I was really glad that I think this, I can't remember if this initiated under Mayor Barry, but I think Mayor Briley completed it. We did this thing, and it, you know, it seems simple on its surface, but it's good to have these data sets too. We created this program called the Equal Business Opportunity Program. And what this is supposed to do is make sure that as we go out and do procurement as Metro, it's not just about, hey, we've had this group of individuals who have known how to do business with Metro through the years, but rather we want the vendor relationship with Metro, if we are going out and doing contracts, we want to make sure that's equitable.
Right.
That means any business, particularly those that are locally owned,
Right.
should have access to be competitive in the Metro procurement process. The inclusivic stuff is a huge look at equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's saying, it causes us to ask the question, are we doing something where our hiring practices are somehow preventing groups of people, whether they're women or in a race or ethnicity category or age,
Right.
preventing them from accessing jobs and careers within Metro? That's a good question to be able to ask.
Yeah.
It's important to have the data to know that you need to ask that question.
Yeah.
That's what was so important about Driving While Black in Nashville. Is these things have highlighted things that are not equitable.
And I think a lot of people are afraid to see that data, to do that research, to pay, because I think
you're right.
I think if you're a semi-rational person and can read and look at it historically, I think we're gonna see and know, like, okay, like we've been knowing this, but sometimes people respect those numbers, those stats, and then after you have that proof, it's like, okay, now everything we've been telling you is actually fact and is in numbers. What do we do? And we know what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to make a hell of a shift culturally, but also gonna have to start spending a lot of money in some places to make sure we change some things systemically. And I think people are really afraid to turn over that rock. And we would love to have a mayor that will turn over that rock and say, hey, look, because if we do that, Freddie, I believe we can all start speaking the same language.
Right.
Because if we're not speaking the same language on things that I think is obvious to me, but may not be obvious to another community member, it's hard to come a lot of times to that point of doing something. But if we can all agree, like, okay, the data, the language is here. Now we have some terms that we can commonly communicate on. Now I think we can really combat and address some issues.
So there was an old director of health here in Nashville named Bill Paul, and he was at the Metro Public Health Department, and he used this phrase that I thought was really great, and I heard Bill Purcell talk about it with him when Dr. Paul was kind of exiting Metro and kind of retiring from that role, and he's gone on to do amazing work on AIDS at a national level since he left. But he used to talk about health in all policies. And I think that's a really important outlook. And it's very closely related to the idea of equity in all policies.
Yeah.
Because then you start to think, okay, is this thing we're doing, is this just for white folks?
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay to think about that. It's okay to think about, hey, we've got a disability community in Nashville.
Yeah.
Is the way we are approaching this issue taking into account the fact that not everybody, like, disability work is equity work?
Yeah.
Right?
Facts.
That's for transit access. That's for building access.
Yeah.
That's for, when you host the state of Metro in a part of the city, is access to that address equitable? And I think those are, when we talk about those simple things, I'm always really interested. So the Cherry Blossom Festival just happened. And one thing that they did really great, so it happens down here at Public Square, and they didn't just talk about where to park. They talked about how to access the festival. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And those are, to me, that's actually a way to make the festival access, and that's why I talk about access as an equity thing.
Yeah.
Suddenly it became a more equitable festival because they were intentional about, we don't want people to come clog up the garage necessarily. And we're recognizing that not everybody who might want to attend this festival is going to drive anyway.
Exactly.
There are other ways to get here that we have to acknowledge because not everybody is going to be
And that's
driving.
that language piece, right? That's that we talking about accessibility and just not getting there. This is how you get there. Now, this is how you access this event. Boom, 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 boom. And if we forgot something, let us know.
That's right. That's right.
I want to shift over to economic development, economic and community development.
Yep.
We're a growing city.
Yep.
We, like you said, we have an operation budget now, $3 billion. Titan Stadium that just passed. So the East Bank, who knows, like what's gonna happen with that. But that community economic development and that growth is it's happening, and it's gonna look different for different people. And as our potential next mayor, how do you go into that office and that administration with the mindset of we know we're growing, but also we have small businesses, we have community members and residents that's been here our whole lives like ourselves that would like to preserve some things. What is your thought process and balance and trying to unpack all of that in the next 4 years possibly, and then another next 4 years possibly, as our next mayor?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important question. It's interesting because it sort of bridges two eras of Nashville. So I started being really involved in civic life when Carl Dean was still mayor.
Okay.
And that was a time when Nashville probably needed to grow a little more quickly than it was. And so there was an approach to economic development that was really a little more growth with not much in the way of guardrails, right? And so it was the use of tax increment financing to go get development done. It was a lot of incentives for corporate relocation. And I understand it, and it positioned us for the growth we enjoyed over the most recent decade. But you need to adapt to the circumstances that you're in. Nashville is no longer a city that needs to raise its hand and say, hey, guys, come here. Like, we need you here. They're coming.
Right.
And I think one of the most extraordinary moments of all at the end of Mayor Cooper's tenure was, I'll be clear, I was not for the deal we got offered on the Titans Stadium.
Right.
We can have a conversation about the Titans staying in Nashville,
Right.
but the deal we were offered was exactly the kind of economic development we do not need at this time
Right.
because of the lack of equity it's going to offer.
And just for the record, the first deal that they signed back in '96 or whatever,
Yeah.
that wasn't the best deal either.
It had a time bomb in it that
Yeah.
said we had to still do something. So
We just wanted the
at
team.
some point in
Yeah.
the next 5 or 6 years, we were probably going to have to spend some money legally
Yeah.
to either improve the stadium or do something new. But we moved very quickly from a deal that was 50-50 for some upgrades to the tune of $600 million, where Metro would have been on the hook for half of that, to somehow a deal that is going to soak up $4 billion of our money
Right.
for a thing that isn't even going to be, again, talk about equity.
Right.
I go to Nashville Sounds games with our family. I go to
Right.
Nashville SC games with our family. Every now and then I go to Predators games with our family. And you look at the ticket prices for those, and the reason we go to more Sounds games than any of those others is that's a pretty
Right.
inexpensive ticket.
Right.
Nashville SC tickets, those are pretty reasonable. Predators tickets start to get a little expensive. Titans tickets or arena shows over there,
Yeah.
I mean, those are expensive tickets.
Right.
And we just put $4 billion of our own money into that.
Right.
That's
But the question that I pose to any deal like this, right? As a community member, as a voter, it's like, how does this benefit community?
That's a
Right.
good question.
Right, and I think if we can't answer that question, or the Titans can't answer that question, or maybe they have an answer for it with their one program. Maybe that's how they approach that with their one program. But it's like, how does having a new stadium that I'm going to be on the hook for, some of my money is going to pay for, a lot of my money is going to pay for, how does that benefit me as a community member? And I don't know, because I'm not a contractor. I'm not gonna be able to bid on the East Bank. So from a business standpoint,
Hey,
that
look,
doesn't really.
Derrick Henry might come over here. You know,
Yeah,
he
right,
might be on
yeah,
deep dish.
Right. Maybe they throw me a bone and say give me on. But I think that's what every community member should have approached this.
So this is my thing. You get to that. So look at the two most recent things we did. When we did the soccer stadium, there was an actual community benefits agreement there that talked about affordable housing in the footprint of the stadium, childcare in the footprint of the stadium, wages at the stadium and in the footprint of the stadium. Those are all great things to think about when you're going to do that. We put all kinds of taxpayer protections in that. Metro, frankly, was barely out any money And the soccer stadium has been a success in every other way than we didn't get the transit and infrastructure right about it.
Right.
Now, we'll fix that when I'm mayor.
Right.
But Predators followed very quickly after that, renegotiating their deal, taking Metro off the hook entirely. And they did it with small increases on, like surcharges on ticket sales there. Well, guess what happened? They're one of the top ticketed venues in the world.
Yeah.
A little bit of extra user fee on tickets when you go to something in Bridgestone, whether it's a Predators game or Lizzo,
Right.
it didn't stop people from booking shows over there. When we tried to do this, Brandon Taylor got an amendment on this deal that would have had that similar effect. And first they were trying to shoot it down altogether, then they watered it down, and they were going to put the money not coming back to Metro, but going into a fund for whatever the Titans were going to do.
Yeah.
We fixed that piece at least, but it's an illustration of the notion of community benefit out of that. We're still crossing our fingers.
Yeah.
And the thing I said up front, when the terms of the deal became very obvious, and they put $500 million of infrastructure required by Metro to build out the neighborhood over there. That's a neighborhood that doesn't exist today.
Right.
We're going to spend $500 million on creating a neighborhood out of scratch, and every other neighborhood in the city ought to be saying, we're getting $500 million too, right?
Yeah.
Like for the rest of the city,
No.
we need to know that over this next 30 years, we've got $500 million we can spend on ourselves, the
Yeah.
people who already live here.
Yeah.
I mean, there are streets
Yeah.
that when it rains hard,
Yeah.
that it floods in
Yeah.
Nashville right now.
Yeah.
We need to spend
Yeah.
infrastructure dollars on that
500
kind of
million
situation.
can go a long way.
500 million
on
can go a long
existing
way.
communities.
500 million builds a lot of sidewalks.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Funds a lot of schools and a lot of affordable housing.
And so we are now legally obligated to put in quite a bit of infrastructure
Yeah.
in 130 acres when we've got 500 square miles to take care of.
Yeah.
And, so now come back to what I think economic and community development should look like. This was also crazy to me. We barely had anybody doing that job for the past 4 years. Yes, Nashville is succeeding, but that's exactly when you lean into small business supports. And when you know cost of living is going up, you know what is also going up, because most of that has to do with the value of land and what people are charging. Well, if you're trying to operate a small business, the other thing that's going up is the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Because we have these amazing industries emerging in Nashville, from fashion to people in the industrial and manufacturing space doing really interesting things, to this great culinary scene that's happening. And so access to commercial kitchens, access to warehouse space, access to places you can be a maker, those places are getting more expensive too. And so part of what we need to be thinking about is how we enable homegrown businesses to come out of this moment and not just get started, but to get past that 3-year mark as businesses and really succeed and thrive.
Virtual businesses, home businesses. Yeah. And that was my thing about even with the economic development of the East Bank. It's like most people are not gonna there's gonna be hotels and restaurants and things like that which benefits a small group of.
Well, we hope that we can do better. So what we have to do now on the East Bank is go make that neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, we will be, if that becomes a sports gambling district anchored by hotels, then we made 2 mistakes. The deal itself and the things that happened as a result of the deal.
Right.
We can fix one of those by actually building neighborhoods over there.
Yeah.
And that means hitting aggressive affordable housing targets.
Right.
And that Metro is the developer.
Yeah.
So I'll say it this way. When you think about the future of the East Bank and how it develops, and this is part of the economic and community development strategy, do you want a mayoral candidate to lead the effort who was for the deal as it was presented, which wasn't even the stuff that we did to make it better?
Yeah.
Or do you want the person who was pushing the whole time for a better deal that more reflected the values of the community, the needs of the community, and opposed the deal at the end for not being good enough for Nashville to shape the future of the East Bank? Because what I want to do over there, now that we know we're going to be doing something, is I want what we just did on 12th Avenue South. I want a street network that is accessible and equitable to anybody over there. I want these ambitious affordable housing targets that were in the East Bank Vision Plan to materialize. I don't want it just to be hotels that are fancy and restaurants that are fancy.
Yeah.
I want it to be places that, if you know how we'll know if it was actually a good outcome?
How will we know?
If the people that are working at the Titan Stadium can live a few blocks away. If they can live a few blocks away, then maybe we got something right about that part of the deal.
And let's switch over to this affordability of housing, right? And which intersects with a lot of things like transit, like homelessness. The Bonds Fund is always a fund that we always asking to pour more and more millions of dollars in. We need 30,000, 50,000, I don't know, units, right, to handle the crisis of affordability. And I think now maybe affordability may be around the $900 a month mark, which is kind of pretty wild. That's considered affordability at the moment. What does our next mayor lead us, or how does he or she lead us into having housing where people that work in Nashville can also live in Nashville, and also still encourages people to want to come to Nashville as well, to live here and have a great quality of life, and can still have a vehicle too, and still do all the other things that promotes a good quality of life. But it starts, I think, a huge pillar starts with affordable housing, which leads into, access to, food and, schooling and all of the healthy foods and all of those things. Unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, so let's start here. Transit is affordable housing. We cannot tackle our cost of living crisis in Nashville without creating a meaningful transit system. It makes if you have the prospect to not even just reduce the number of cars in your household, but reduce the number of trips and keep wear and tear on your car down and keep your gas bill down, all of that stuff, it's a big deal. If you can reduce a car, I've got a teacher who lives out in southeast Nashville and a couple that teach at Hume Fogg in the district I represent. These guys live out on Nolensville and they bike in. And Nolensville's a dangerous place and we should make it safer. If they can put their bike on a bus and do this, they're able to keep serving our students and live in a part of the city that is actually now more accessible to downtown, safer for them to access. And they're not worried about a car payment anymore. And they're not worried about their gas bill, their insurance. They're putting that money into other things about their success and being able to thrive in Nashville. That's a big deal. Now, you brought up the Barnes Fund. Good news from yesterday. For the first time since our Affordable Housing Task Force report came out, the mayor's budget will recommend $30 million going directly into the Barnes Fund. This is a big deal. As a result of that, and some of the work that council has done to ensure investments in affordable and attainable housing, we think the pipeline might actually hit 5,000 units of housing that is at 80% or lower of the area median income. So truly attainable housing for a lot of people trying to work in Nashville. That's a big deal. Now, you mentioned the headline, though, which is we need 30 to 50,000. We have built tools. Now, the hard part is the state keeps smashing some of our tools. We tried to do inclusionary zoning, which is if you voluntarily go and say, hey, I'd like to do more than my current entitlements allow me to build, we as a city are going to ask, if you're building apartments, keep a small number of those very affordable. And the state said, nope, we're going to make that illegal. Just recently, council and the mayor's office said, hey, the convention center is doing so well, we're going to dedicate some of those surpluses to the affordable housing. Well, guess what the state did? They turned their defund the convention center effort into, okay, we'll let you keep your revenue streams, but you cannot use the surpluses for affordable housing anymore. So they smashed that tool. Literally one of the reasons that I am running for mayor is to stop making these generational mistakes like the Titans deal and start to do things in a way that defends us as Nashvillians. And this includes the affordable housing piece. Because if you can't afford to live here, you can't stay here. And I want people to stay in Nashville.
Well, my concept of what will happen. If we don't get transit, and it's maybe just an and, but if we don't get transit in some of like more affordable living here, what'll happen is these other places like Murfreesboro, Clarksville, right?
Yep.
They'll start developing because people will start living out there. And then what'll happen is they'll start having jobs, right, that from a wage perspective compete with what they're making here.
We're already seeing it.
And then it's gonna make sense as well. I don't need to come to Nashville to work or live. I can just come to play. That'll be it. I'll just come and have my fun, Broadway and all of these other places and go right back home. But the economic power was live and stay in those other cities and counties. And things are only going to get more expensive, right? The cost of transit, affordability, materials, all these things are just going to cost. And we know it's already going to take a long time in a sense to build anyway, but if we don't start making some decisions.
So that's why I think as we link all of those things, as we link our economic and community development practices, as we link our transit system, and as we think about affordable housing policy, this is where we have to really lean into all of these efforts to make this city a place where people can stay and want to stay, especially as the state is bearing down on us more every single year. And so, another great example. We are watching the old Elliott School in Germantown, just a few blocks from where I live, turn into housing right now. Now it's market rate stuff. It's not affordable, but it's a great example of, hey, this used to be a Metro building. What are they doing with it? They're turning it into housing. Well, just around the corner, we have the Fear School in my neighborhood in Salemtown. Now we have Buena Vista, which was until just a few years ago an elementary school. These are now vacant school buildings. Just around the corner, Jones is still an elementary school. If we turn these school buildings into housing for teachers and for first responders, now you've made it more affordable for the people we are asking to teach our kids and keep us safe to stay in the communities we are asking them to do that in.
And then that helps build relationships with those individuals
that is correct.
In the community, right?
That is correct.
What makes you the best candidate? As we get into the tail end of this, just bluntly, why should people vote for Freddie O'Connell instead of the other 15, 20, other 30 people that's running?
Unusually in this field, we don't have a majority of the candidates right now who have a deep familiarity with Metro. I have spent the past, not just 8 years on Metro Council, but even before that as a Metro board member, understanding these processes. The mayor is not just somebody who makes a budget. The mayor makes appointments to the many boards and commissions. The mayor works with the department heads to ensure that everybody is aligned and moving the city forward. The mayor is setting spending priorities and using the executive functions of that office. And I have worked closely with mayors now for 2 decades. I have seen what works and had private sector experience that influences how we build teams and make them successful and work in alignment. We have built incredible coalitions on the Metro Council to do transformative work in Metro government. If you want someone with receipts and the cell phone numbers of not just department heads and rank and file employees through Metro, who also has the lived experience of having 2 children in our public school system, who is a transit user, who uses our parks and libraries regularly. There is no other candidate with the mix of professional experience, lived experience, relying on Metro services, knowing how to improve them, and the depth of knowledge of policy in Metro that can bring teams together. Now couple that with what we want to do in the mayor's office. There is no other candidate who will be as committed to, as capable of, and ready to go on day one to build a transit system, to support things with affordable housing policies, to do the bigger picture of community safety. And I think that preparedness on day one is a big deal. This is literally the worst time in the city's history, with the track record we've had of volatility in Metro government, to have somebody learning to be mayor for a year.
And that was kind of going to lead to my next question of, if we don't get this right, what does that mean for the future? Or what will that mean for the future of Nashville?
Good luck. I mean, more of the same is out there in a big way. More of the same is raising huge money.
Right.
More of the same that said, hey, this deal, which we haven't actually looked at real closely, this deal is a good deal. We should do it. And that's what people should, I mean, I'll say it this way. If you are frustrated about the things that are happening in this city right now, this is going to be an important decision for you, right? Because the people that want to make the same types of decisions are raising a lot of money. And that's what people should be thinking about.
What would you say to those people what would you say to those people who believe that we don't want another politician, and coming from, we've seen all these other politicians in this position, and we need somebody that doesn't have that political experience or political record?
I mean, this is where I think look at the people who are supporting me. One of the very first people to publicly endorse me was Sandra Sepulveda. And I don't think people think of her as a politician.
Right.
They see a young Latina on the Metro Council who is one of the most important leaders in this city. If you look at Bob Mendez, who just publicly endorsed us, this has been one of the most thoughtful, progressive leaders on council who has been talking in terms of fiscal realities that turned out to be very important, who has done incredibly important work on accountability across whole of Metro, but including deep dives on things like driving while black in Nashville. It turns out that being a politician can be just, wanting to have a press conference every week or go to ribbon cuttings, but being a politician can also mean doing things like what I've already done. It can mean passing incredibly transformative energy policy that has Metro on track to have zero emission fleet of vehicles, 100% renewable energy, and stronger green building standards. It can mean doing the important work we did in 37208, where we first eliminated jailers' fees. We then went on, after that initial work, to have an entire group that went to do millions of more punitive fines and fees, which are really punishing people for the crime of being poor. Being a politician isn't just standing up and doing things that are bad for people. The people who are best at this are the ones who know policy, care, and are willing to work hard. That's exactly what I've done. And we've got a box full of receipts that I'm happy to discuss with voters all spring and summer.
Power. We know we're a very mayor-led city in Nashville, which holds a lot of power. What does that mean to you? And how do you use that power to create a better, more equitable, more just Nashville if elected mayor?
So that's really the whole key here, is if, again, a mayor has more capacity than anybody in the city to do good things that are popular. And transit is a good thing that is popular, that you can't deliver from council. Safer infrastructure is a thing that a mayor does. Smart generational use of federal funds, like the buckets of money we still have in front of us, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, these are federal money opportunities that we just have never seen before and might never see again in our lifetime. And we should be planning, the mayor should be planning to have these have a lasting impact that people will remember. I mean, I want this next 4-year period of Nashville to be the time that, we got some really important things right. We showed other cities how to do this stuff in ways that people will remember. That's the power of the mayor. And we have been almost there before, right? We have been nationally heralded in times past, and I want us to be, think about it this way. The Titans deal, we set a record. We set a record for the largest public subsidy for a stadium in the history of the NFL.
Right.
That's not the record I want to be setting right now.
Right.
I want to be setting a record for a southern city that grew transit ridership faster than any other city, a southern city that delivered more units of affordable housing than any other city, right? I want to be a southern city that within our 3-year period transformed its government to be 100% solar.
Right.
And all of these goals, that's what it's about. It's about using the power to set and then move toward goals in a way that brings people with you. Because all of these things are popular things. When we were out at 12 South today, the number of people there was what was astonishing to all the council members who were present, right?
Yeah.
It was like, here were people coming to celebrate. We just made this incredibly dangerous corridor where children are having a difficult time crossing the street to get to community centers and libraries and all of that. And people came out to celebrate that we had just transformed it to make it safer and more accessible. That's the power of the mayor.
As we close, I want to give you a chance to unpack your vision or extrapolate on anything that we may didn't touch on, or you want to touch on a little bit more for the potential voters and the listeners.
So I would say a few months ago, I mean, I've been running now for a year, as we said.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was important to challenge the status quo because we weren't focusing on the things that Nashville really needs, and we still probably won't for the next few months. I mean, our next conversation is going to be about NASCAR, right? That's as I travel the county, nobody's saying, "Hey, get to work on NASCAR." That's a thing we urgently need, right? As I travel the county, people are saying, "I'm having a hard time staying in Nashville." And a conversation a few months ago with a friend helped me understand that that's the real reason I'm running. I was saying, there are so many things that are frustrating right now. And he was like, yeah, the people that I'm talking to are telling me they're thinking about leaving. And I'm having these conversations. This past year, I've had so many people from all walks of life, Nashville natives, people who came here for an opportunity when our economy really did start to grow and offer some different things. Teenagers who are thinking about college and where they'll go next, but also people who have lived here decades, saying they want to leave. And so we had this conversation, and I said, but I really want people to stay because it is the people of Nashville that are what create all of the things that we used to love, could still love, want to love. Like the people that want to stay in love with this city, I want them to stay. And he said, that's your message. And so that is it. The simplicity of it is, if you want a mayor who is going to fight every day for you to be able to stay in Nashville and to want to stay in Nashville, then remember Freddie O'Connell and look for us starting July 14th, because that is when early voting opens. And if you miss any of the early voting days, don't miss August 3rd, because that's election day. And if you want to find out more about what we're working on, go to readyforfreddie.com.
And that's what I'm going to ask you next. How can people support your campaign?
That's it, readyforfreddie.com.
Perfect. Well, Freddie, look, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, see you.
Great to be back in a totally different way.
Yeah, and good luck on the campaign. And again, for me, for all the listeners, whatever, it's kind of personal because it's whether you win or lose, I know that you'll still be here in community, right? And I'm not sure that's the same for every candidate that's running. But I want the public, especially new Nashvillians, right? And old, but definitely new ones who are trying to get a grasp on our candidates. These interviews really help, but I would look at what people have done and haven't done before they started running for mayor. And that'll give you, I think, some insight, some underlining insight, and some direct and indirect insight on, who they may be or may not be going into, a mayoral administration. So I want to thank you for all of your work that you've actually done that's been community centered and always showing up for community, and also me personally, to my things that I invite Freddie to, he's there. If I don't invite him, he's there. And so this is always good seeing you and giving you your flowers.
Well, look,
just for what you've
congratulations, because this was basically a podcast, and now it's like, here you are, you're on television, you're doing events, you got a book.
We all scaling up, and I have, and it's all community centered. So just like many of your things, I couldn't have done it without being community centered, community based, and bringing community with me.
Well, it's great, and I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you. And I will say this too. Yes, we are present. I didn't just show up because I'm running a mayor, but we're running to win.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we're going to go out and do that. That's what
Good
as
luck.
I leave this studio, we're going to go on and find some more voters. So
All right, till next time,
Appreciate it.
Freddie.